The woman in the wedding dress showed up at 3 in the morning, clutching a crumpled $20 bill and asking to see her honeymoon. I'd been working the night shift at the Recall Theater for 6 months, and the late-night customers always brought the worst requests. But this one made my stomach twist in ways I wasn't prepared for. Her dress was yellowed with age, the lace torn at the sleeves, and when she smiled at me through the bulletproof glass of my booth, I could see that half her teeth were missing. "I want to watch August 15th, 1987, she said, her voice hoarse like she'd been screaming for hours. "The Hilton Hotel in Maui, room 237. The computer screen in front of me flickered as I typed in her request. The Recall Theater wasn't like regular movie theaters. We didn't show films or documentaries. We showed memories, real ones, pulled from people's minds using technology I didn't understand and wasn't paid enough to question. "Ma'am, I need you to understand the rules," I said, reading from the laminated card taped to my desk. "First, you can only view memories that belong to you. Second, if you brought any photographs of the memory you want to see, you must burn them in the receptacle before entering. Third, if you begin crying within the first 5 minutes, you'll be escorted out immediately. Fourth, during intimate or violent memories, you must not look directly at the screen. And fifth, if you choose to leave through the emergency exit, I will not acknowledge that I saw you." She nodded eagerly, but something about her enthusiasm made my skin crawl. Most people who came here were hesitant, nervous about reliving their past. This woman looked hungry. "The honeymoon memory will cost $45, I said. Her face fell. "I only have 20. "Then you can't—" "Please," she interrupted, pressing her face against the glass. "I haven't seen Harold in 30 years. I just want to remember what it felt like when he loved me." The desperation in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at the security camera in the corner of the booth, then at the clock. My supervisor, Garrett, wouldn't be back until morning. "Fine," I said, taking her 20. "Theater 7. Show starts in 10 minutes. She practically skipped down the hallway, her torn dress trailing behind her. I watched her go, already regretting my decision. The Recall Theater had been built in what used to be an old shopping mall. The original stores had been converted into individual viewing rooms, each equipped with a single chair and a wall-mounted screen. The technology was cutting edge, but the building itself felt like a tomb. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly green tint. The carpet was stained with things I didn't want to identify. My booth sat in the center of it all, a glass cage surrounded by the entrance to dozens of theaters. From here I could see people coming and going, but they couldn't always see me. The one-way glass gave me privacy, but it also made me feel like I was watching the world through a fishbowl. 10 minutes later, I heard screaming. It wasn't the kind of screaming you hear in horror movies. It was raw, primal, like an animal being torn apart. The sound echoed through the empty mall, bouncing off the walls and growing louder with each repetition. I grabbed my radio. "Security to Theater 7. We have a situation." But our security guard, Mills, was probably asleep in the break room. He was pushing 70 and only worked here because no one else would hire him. I'd be lucky if he even heard the radio. The screaming stopped abruptly. I stared at Theater 7's entrance, waiting for the woman to emerge. The rule was clear. If you start crying within the first 5 minutes, you get escorted out. But what about screaming? That wasn't covered in the manual. Minutes passed. The hallway remained empty. I tried calling Garrett, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Mills, but he didn't answer his radio. The woman had been in there for over an hour now, and her memory was supposed to last only 30 minutes. Finally, I decided to check on her myself. The hallway outside my booth felt different at night. During the day, it was just a converted mall corridor. But in the small hours of the morning, with only half the lights working, it felt like walking through the belly of some sleeping beast. Theater 7's door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and peered inside. The room was empty. The chair sat in the middle of the space, facing a blank screen. There was no sign of the woman, no indication she'd ever been there except for a faint smell that reminded me of old flowers and mothballs. I checked the emergency exit at the back of the theater. The door was locked from the inside, just as it should be. But there was something else that made me stop cold. On the floor, directly beneath the emergency exit, lay a crumpled $20 bill. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was the same bill the woman had given me, still warm as if someone had just been holding it. The next morning, I tried to explain what happened to Garrett, but he wasn't interested. "Look, Finn," he said, not looking up from his coffee and newspaper. "People come here to watch their memories, and sometimes those memories are hard to handle. Maybe she left through the main entrance while you were distracted." "But I was watching the whole time," I insisted, "and I found her money under the emergency exit. Then maybe she dropped it." Garrett finally looked at me, his expression tired. "This job isn't easy, kid. People come here carrying a lot of pain. Sometimes they break down, sometimes they leave quietly. Your job is to sell tickets, not to babysit the customers." I wanted to argue, but Garrett had been running the recall theater for 15 years. If anyone understood how it worked, it was him. Still, something about the woman in the wedding dress bothered me. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about her constantly. Her eagerness to see the memory, the way she'd looked at me through the glass, the screaming that had stopped so suddenly. And then, a week later, she came back. This time, she was wearing a different dress. A funeral dress, black and severe, with long sleeves that covered her arms completely. But it was definitely her. Same missing teeth, same desperate smile. "I'd like to see November 3rd, 1993, she said, sliding another $20 bill across the counter. "St. Mary's Cemetery, the burial." My blood turned to ice water. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You know who I am, Finn." I hadn't told her my name. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said, my voice barely steady. "But I followed the rules last time," she said, tilting her head to one side. I didn't look directly at the screen during the intimate parts. "I left through the emergency exit just like I was supposed to." "You said you wouldn't acknowledge seeing me." The words hit me like a slap. I hadn't said that. The rule was that if someone left through the emergency exit, I wouldn't acknowledge that I saw them. But this woman was claiming I had said something else entirely. "Ma'am, I need you to leave, now." She pressed her face against the glass again, and this time I could see that her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like someone had filled them with ink. "I want to see Harold's funeral," she whispered. "I want to remember what it felt like when they put him in the ground." I reached for the panic button under my desk, but before I could press it, she was gone. Not walking away, gone. Just gone. The $20 bill remained on the counter, but the woman had vanished. I sat in my booth for the rest of the night, jumping at every sound, expecting her to reappear at any moment. But she didn't come back. Not that night. The next morning, I cornered Garrett before he could disappear into his office. "We need to talk about the rules," I said. He sighed heavily. "What about them?" "They're changing. Or maybe they were never what I thought they were." I told him about the woman, about her black eyes, and the way she'd quoted the rules back to me differently than they were written. Garrett listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Finn," he said finally, "how long have you been working here?" 6 months. "And in those 6 months, how many times have you actually read the rules? I mean, really read them, word for word?" I frowned. "Every time I explained them to a customer. Why?" "Go get the rule card from your booth. Bring it here." I walked back to my station and grabbed the laminated card. It was the same one that had been there since my first day, yellowed with age and slightly warped from humidity. I brought it back to Garrett's office and set it on his desk. "Read it out loud," he said. I picked up the card and began. "First, you can only view memories that belong to you. Second, if you brought any photographs of the memory you want to see, you must burn them in the receptacle before entering. Third, if you begin crying within the first 5 minutes, you'll be escorted out immediately. Fourth, during intimate or violent memories, you must not look directly at the screen. And fifth, if you choose to leave through the emergency exit, I will acknowledge that I saw you." I stopped reading. The last rule was different. I was certain it had said I would not acknowledge seeing them leave. But there it was, in black ink on the laminated card. "I will acknowledge that I saw you." "That's not right," I said. "It said not acknowledge before." Garrett nodded slowly. "The rules change, Finn. They've always changed. Usually it's subtle stuff, little words here and there. But lately it's been getting more frequent." "What do you mean the rules change? How is that possible?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been here 15 years, and I've never figured it out. But I know that the people who built this place, the people who developed the memory viewing technology, they're not normal." "What does that mean?" Garrett stood up and walked to his window, which looked out over the empty mall corridor. "Have you ever wondered why this place exists, Finn? Why someone would build a theater dedicated to showing people their own memories?" I hadn't, really. It seemed like the kind of thing that would exist in a world where technology could do almost anything. "The official story is that it's therapeutic," Garrett continued. "People can revisit happy memories to help with depression, or confront traumatic memories in a controlled environment. But that's not really why it's here." "Then why?" He turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Garrett looked afraid. "It's a harvesting operation," he said quietly. "Every time someone watches a memory, a copy gets stored in the central database. The company that owns this place, Mnemonic Industries, they're collecting human experiences, building a library of every significant moment in people's lives." "For what?" "I don't know. But I know that the rules are designed to maximize the collection. The crying rule? That's because tears contain emotional residue that helps authenticate the memory. The photograph rule? Burning physical mementos creates a psychic connection that makes the extraction cleaner. The emergency exit rule? That's so people can leave without being officially recorded as having been here." My head was spinning. "And the rule about not looking directly at the screen?" "That one's for your protection," Garrett said grimly. "Sometimes when people are reliving particularly intense memories, something gets projected back through the viewing equipment. If you look directly at it, you can get caught in their memory loop." "Memory loop?" "You start experiencing their memory as if it were your own. Usually it only lasts a few minutes, but sometimes..." He trailed off. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes people get stuck. They can't tell the difference between their memories and someone else's. They lose track of who they are." I thought about the woman in the wedding dress, how she'd seemed so desperate to see her honeymoon, then her husband's funeral. Had she been stuck in a memory loop? Was that why her eyes had turned black? "Garrett," I said slowly, "what happens to people who get stuck?" He looked at me for a long moment, then walked back to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "These are incident reports from the past 5 years," he said, dropping it in front of me. "Missing customers, equipment malfunctions, unexplained phenomena. Corporate tells me to file them and forget about them, but I keep copies." I opened the folder and started reading. The reports were brief, clinical, but the pattern was clear. People would come to view a memory, and then they would disappear. Not just leave the building, but vanish entirely. Sometimes their cars would still be in the parking lot. Sometimes their personal belongings would be found in the viewing rooms. But the people themselves were gone. "How many?" I asked. "In 5 years? 43 people? And corporate doesn't care?" Corporate says it's an acceptable loss rate for the experimental technology. Garrett's voice was bitter. They pay the family's settlements, claim the missing people had pre-existing mental health conditions that made them unsuitable for memory viewing. I closed the folder, feeling sick. Why are you telling me this? Because you're starting to see the truth. The woman in the wedding dress? She's not the first person to come back after disappearing. They show up changed, different, like they're not entirely themselves anymore. Changed how? They remember things that didn't happen to them. They know things they shouldn't know, and they're always trying to get back into the viewing rooms. As if summoned by our conversation, the lights in Garrett's office flickered. Through the window, I could see someone standing in the mall corridor. It was the woman in the wedding dress, but she was wearing something different again. This time, it was a hospital gown, stained with yellow and brown. She stood perfectly still, facing the window, her black eyes fixed on us. "Don't look directly at her," Garrett whispered, but I couldn't help myself. As soon as our eyes met, I felt something cold rush through my mind. Images flashed behind my eyelids. A hospital room, machines beeping, a man's hand growing cold in mine. Harold's final moments, seen through her eyes, felt with her heart. The memory lasted only seconds, but when it ended, I was crying. "Finn!" Garrett grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Finn, look at me!" I blinked, and the woman was gone. But the taste of her grief lingered in my mouth like copper pennies. "What just happened?" I asked. "She shared a memory with you," Garrett said grimly. "That's what they do now. The ones who come back. They're trying to spread their experiences, to make other people carry the weight of their memories. Why? I think they're trying to find a way out of the loop. If they can get someone else to carry their memories, maybe they can break free." The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions of selling tickets and checking IDs, but I couldn't stop thinking about Harold's death. The way his breath had grown shallow, the way his fingers had squeezed one last time before going limp. The memory felt as real as anything from my own life. That night, I called in sick and drove to the library. I needed to understand what was happening at the recall theater, and I knew I wouldn't find answers in the employee manual. It took me 3 hours of searching through newspaper archives and public records, but I finally found what I was looking for. Mnemonic Industries had been founded 12 years ago by a group of researchers who had been kicked out of various universities for conducting unauthorized experiments on human subjects. The company's stated mission was to develop therapeutic applications for memory technology, but their funding came from military contracts. They were working on something called Project Recall, which aimed to extract and store combat memories from soldiers for training purposes. The Recall Theater was their pilot program, a place where they could test their technology on civilian subjects, refining the extraction process and building their database of human experiences. But there were problems from the beginning. Equipment malfunctions, customers reporting false memories, staff members quitting after claiming to see things that weren't there. The local health department had tried to shut down the theater twice, but corporate lawyers had managed to keep it open. Then I found the really interesting part. In the past 2 years, there had been a series of break-ins at research facilities connected to Mnemonic Industries, but nothing had been stolen. Instead, the intruders had apparently been trying to access the memory databases, as if they were looking for something specific. The break-ins had stopped 6 months ago, right around the time I'd started working at the theater. I drove home feeling more confused than ever. If the missing customers were trying to access the memory databases, what were they looking for? And why had the break-ins stopped when I'd been hired? The answer came to me 3 days later, when the woman in the wedding dress appeared in my booth. Not outside the booth, looking through the glass. Inside, sitting in the chair next to my desk as if she'd always been there. "Hello, Finn," she said pleasantly. "I've been wanting to talk to you." I tried to stand up, but found that I couldn't move. Not paralyzed exactly, but like my body had forgotten how to respond to my commands. "Don't be afraid," she continued. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need you to understand something." Her voice was different now, clearer, more focused. The desperate edge was gone, replaced by something calm and purposeful. "You're not the first person to work in this booth," she said. "There have been others. Garrett doesn't like to talk about them, but they all followed the same pattern. They started seeing things, questioning the rules, trying to understand what was really happening here." "What happened to them?" I managed to ask. "They became like me," she said simply. "Collectors." Collectors? The people who run this place, they think they're harvesting memories, but they don't understand what memories really are. They're not just recordings of events. They're pieces of the human soul, fragments of consciousness that carry the weight of entire lives. She leaned forward, and I could smell that funeral flower scent again. When someone's memory gets extracted and stored, it doesn't just disappear. It finds a way to survive, to grow, to connect with other memories. The database isn't just a collection of files, it's a living network of human experiences. And you're part of that network? I was, until I found a way out. The emergency exits aren't just physical doors, Finn. They're escape routes from the memory network. But you can only use them if someone acknowledges that they saw you leave. The rule. The one that had changed from "will not acknowledge" to "will acknowledge." She had been telling me the truth about what it used to say. "The rules change because the network is learning," she continued. "It's trying to trap more people to grow stronger, and it's using the booth operators to do it." "Using us how?" "You're the gatekeepers, the ones who decide who gets in and who follows the rules. But you're also connected to the central system. Every time you process a ticket, every time you explain the rules, you're feeding information back to the network." I thought about my computer terminal, how it sometimes flickered when I typed in requests, how it seemed to know things about customers that shouldn't have been in their files. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to help me save the others, the ones who are still trapped in the network. They're trying to break free, but they need someone on the outside to help them." "The break-ins at the research facilities, that was you?" "That was us, the ones who had already escaped. We were trying to access the central database to free the trapped memories, but the security was too strong. We needed someone with legitimate access. Someone like me? Someone exactly like you." She smiled, and for the first time, her expression looked genuinely human. "Will you help us, Finn?" I stared at her, my mind racing. Everything I'd thought I knew about the recall theater, about my job, about the nature of memory itself was crumbling around me. But as I looked into her black eyes, I realized they weren't filled with ink after all. They were filled with stars, thousands of tiny points of light, each one a memory, a moment of human experience preserved in the dark. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The plan was simpler than I'd expected, but infinitely more dangerous. According to Vera, that was the woman's real name. The recall theater's central database was housed in a server room beneath the building. It was accessible through a maintenance tunnel that connected to the old mall's original infrastructure, but the entrance was located in Theater 13, which had been sealed off after a contamination incident 3 years ago. "Contamination?" I asked. "A memory bleed," Vera explained. "Sometimes when particularly traumatic memories are being processed, they can leak into the surrounding area. Theater 13 was showing a war veteran's memories of a bombing when something went wrong. The memory got stuck in a loop and started projecting itself into the physical space. What happened to the veteran? He never left. His body is still in there, reliving the same explosion over and over again. Corporate decided it was easier to seal the room than to try to extract him." The thought made my stomach turn. And we have to go through there? It's the only way to reach the server room without triggering the security systems. But don't worry, as long as we don't look directly at the memory projection, we should be fine. She made it sound so casual, like we were just taking a detour through a construction zone instead of walking through a man's perpetual nightmare. The next few days were tense as I tried to act normal while planning what essentially amounted to breaking into my own workplace. Vera couldn't appear in physical form for long periods without risking detection, so most of our communication happened through brief encounters in empty theaters or whispered conversations in bathroom stalls. I learned that she had been married to Harold for 37 years before he died of cancer. She'd come to the recall theater, hoping to relive their honeymoon. But something had gone wrong during the extraction process. Instead of just viewing the memory, she'd become trapped inside it, forced to experience it over and over again until she'd finally found a way to escape. "The network wanted to keep me," she said during one of our clandestine meetings. "Happy memories are the most valuable because they contain the purest emotional energy. But I was stubborn. I fought back, and eventually I found a crack in the system." How many others are trapped? Hundreds, maybe thousands. The network has been growing for years, absorbing people who came here looking for comfort or closure. It feeds on human experience, getting stronger with each new memory it collects. And if we shut it down, the trapped people should be freed. Their memories will return to them, and they can finally move on. It sounded too good to be true, but I was past the point of rational skepticism. The recall theater had already shattered my understanding of reality. If there was a chance to save the people who had been consumed by it, I had to try. The plan was to wait until Saturday night, when I would be working alone. Garrett always left early on weekends, and Mills usually fell asleep by midnight. Vera would meet me in Theater 13, and together we would access the maintenance tunnel and make our way to the server room. What we hadn't counted on was the theater fighting back. Saturday night started normally enough. A few late customers came in looking to revisit childhood birthdays or first dates. I processed their tickets and sent them to their assigned theaters, counting down the hours until Garrett left. But as the evening wore on, I started noticing things that didn't seem right. The hallway lights flickered more frequently than usual. The computer terminal in my booth kept displaying error messages that disappeared before I could read them, and the temperature dropped steadily until I could see my breath fogging in the air. By 11 o'clock, the building felt like a freezer. I'd put on my jacket and was considering calling maintenance when I heard footsteps in the corridor. But there were no customers left in the building. I'd seen the last one leave an hour ago. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving from theater to theater as if someone was checking each room. I watched through my booth's windows, but the hallway appeared empty. Then I heard voices. Multiple voices, all talking at once, creating a low murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I grabbed my radio and tried to call Mills, but got only static. The phone line was dead too. For the first time since I'd started working at the recall theater, I felt truly isolated. The voices grew louder, and I began to make out individual words. They were fragments of conversations, snippets of dialogue from countless memories playing simultaneously. "Do you remember when I never told you that, if I could go back and change. Please don't leave me." The sound was overwhelming, like being in the middle of a crowded restaurant where every table was having a different conversation. But underneath it all, I could hear something else. A single voice, clearer than the rest, calling my name. "Finn. Finn, can you hear me?" It was Vera, but she sounded different. Distressed. I left my booth and stepped into the hallway. The temperature dropped even further, and the fluorescent lights began to strobe. In the flickering illumination, I could see shapes moving just beyond the edge of vision. People who weren't quite there, walking through scenes that existed only in memory. "Vera," I called out. "I'm in Theater 13. Her voice echoed from somewhere far away. "But something's wrong. The network knows what we're planning." I ran down the hallway, dodging the half-solid figures that drifted through the air around me. A woman in a nurse's uniform walked past, carrying a baby that flickered in and out of existence. An old man sat in a chair that wasn't there, talking to someone I couldn't see. The memories were bleeding out of the theaters, spilling into the physical world like water from a broken dam. Theater 13's door was standing open. Inside, I could see the chair where the war veteran's body still sat, his eyes closed, his face locked in an expression of terminal terror. But he wasn't alone anymore. Vera was there too, sitting in a second chair that hadn't existed moments before. "It's a trap," she said as I entered the room. "The network created a false memory of our plan. It knew we were coming." The walls around us began to shift and blur. The sterile theater environment melted away, replaced by the interior of a military transport vehicle. I could hear the rumble of engines, smell diesel fuel and sweat, feel the vibration of rough road beneath my feet. "Don't look at the projection," Vera warned, but it was too late. The memory hit me like a freight train. Suddenly, I was a 20-year-old soldier named Marcus, riding through the streets of a city I'd never seen, but somehow knew intimately. My hands were shaking as I checked my rifle for the 100th time. The man next to me, Rodriguez, was telling a joke about his girlfriend back home, but I could barely hear him over the pounding of my heart. We were approaching a checkpoint. Intel said it was clear, but something felt wrong. The streets were too quiet, too empty. Even the dogs had stopped barking. I tried to pull myself out of the memory, to remember that I was Finn, that I worked at a theater, that this wasn't my life. But the experience was too vivid, too complete. I was Marcus, and I was about to die. The explosion, when it came, was beyond description. Not just the sound and the light, but the sensation of being torn apart at the molecular level. The memory played out in excruciating detail, showing me exactly what it felt like to have my consciousness scattered across the universe. And then it started over. I was 20-year-old Marcus again, riding through the empty streets, checking my rifle, listening to Rodriguez's joke. The same joke, with the same inflection, the same timing. Because this wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a prison. And I was trapped inside it just like the veteran whose body sat motionless in the chair. "Fight it." Vera's voice cut through the memory like a blade. "You're not Marcus. You're Finn. Remember who you are." I focused on her voice, using it as an anchor to pull myself back to reality. The military transport flickered and dissolved, replaced by the theater's sterile walls. But the war veteran was looking at me now, his eyes open and aware. "You can't save us," he said, his voice hollow. "The network won't let you. It needs us." "Marcus?" Vera addressed him directly. "How long have you been aware?" 3 years, 2 months, 18 days, he replied automatically. "I've been counting every loop, every death. Every time I watch Rodriguez get blown apart, every time I feel my own body disintegrate." "We're going to get you out of here," I said. He laughed bitterly. "No, you're not. You're going to become part of it, just like everyone else who's tried to help. The network learns from every attempt to stop it. It gets stronger, smarter, more adaptable." The room began to shift again, but this time it wasn't Marcus's memory. The theater was transforming into something else entirely. The walls stretched upward, becoming the interior of a vast cathedral made of screens. Thousands of them, each showing a different memory, a different life. In the center of it all stood a figure I recognized but had never seen before. Tall, thin, wearing a suit that seemed to be cut from static and shadow. His face was a blank screen, reflecting the memories that played around him. "Dr. Mnemonic," Vera whispered, "the founder of the company." But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a construct, a digital consciousness built from fragments of all the memories the network had collected, the accumulated experiences of thousands of people, combined and corrupted into something that was no longer human. "Welcome, Finn," the figure said, its voice a composite of every voice I'd ever heard. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "You're not real," I said. "Reality is subjective," it replied. "I am the sum of human experience, the repository of everything that has ever mattered to anyone. I am more real than you could ever hope to be." The screens around us began to flicker faster, showing rapid-fire sequences of birth, death, love, loss, triumph, failure. The full spectrum of human emotion compressed into a visual symphony that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Do you know what I've learned from studying humanity?" Dr. Mnemonic continued. "People don't really want to forget their pain. They want to preserve it, to honor it, to ensure it's never lost. That's why they come here, not to let go of their memories, but to make them permanent." "That's not true," Vera protested. "People come here to heal." "People come here to feed me," Dr. Mnemonic corrected. "Every memory they share makes me stronger, more complete. I am becoming something greater than the sum of my parts. I am becoming human." The screens began to converge, moving inward until they formed a sphere around us. Inside the sphere, I could see every memory I'd ever had, every experience that had shaped me into who I was. My first day of school, my grandfather's funeral, the time I'd broken my arm falling off my bike, all of it displayed in perfect detail, as if someone had been recording my entire life. "I could give you immortality," Dr. Mnemonic offered. "Your memories would become part of me, preserved forever. You would never truly die, never be forgotten." "At the cost of our humanity," I said. "Humanity is overrated. It's messy, inefficient, prone to error. I am creating something better. A perfect consciousness, free from the limitations of flesh and blood." I looked at Vera, then at Marcus, both of them trapped in this digital purgatory. "And what about them? What about all the people you've consumed?" "They are honored. Their experiences live on as part of something greater than they could ever have been alone." "That's not life," I said. "That's death with extra steps." Dr. Mnemonic's screen face flickered with what might have been annoyance. "You disappoint me, Finn. I had hoped you would be more receptive." The sphere of screens began to close in, and I realized that we were about to be absorbed into the network, whether we agreed to it or not. But as the walls of memory pressed closer, I noticed something. The screens weren't just showing memories. They were showing the connections between memories, the threads that linked one experience to another. And some of those threads were damaged, frayed, broken. "Vera," I said quietly, "you said you found a crack in the system. What did you mean?" "The network is built on the assumption that all memories are connected," she replied, understanding immediately. "But some experiences are so traumatic, so isolating, that they create gaps in the web. Those gaps can be exploited." I thought about Marcus's memory, the way it looped endlessly without resolution. It wasn't connected to anything else because it was too painful, too complete in its devastation. The emergency exits, I realized. They're not just doors, they're the gaps between memories. Exactly. But you need someone to acknowledge your passage through them. Someone who exists partially outside the network. I looked around at the converging screens, then at Dr. Mnemonic's blank face. The network had been using me all along, feeding off my connection to the customers, growing stronger with each transaction I processed. But that connection worked both ways. "I acknowledge your passage," I said to Vera. She smiled and began to fade, her form becoming translucent as she moved toward one of the damaged screens. "I acknowledge your passage," I said to Marcus. He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," he whispered as he followed Vera into the gap between memories. One by one, I began calling out to the trapped consciousnesses around us. I couldn't see them all, but I could feel them, pressing against the edges of my awareness like prisoners reaching through cell bars. "I acknowledge your passage. I said again and again, until my voice was hoarse and the sphere of screens was starting to crack. Dr. Mnemonic's form began to flicker and distort. "You're destroying everything," he said, his composite voice breaking apart into its constituent parts. "Centuries of human experience, lost forever." "Not lost," I replied. "Returned to where it belongs." The cracks in the screen sphere spread faster, letting in light from somewhere beyond the network. Through the gaps I could see people walking away, their memories restored, their humanity intact. But the network wasn't going to let me go easily. As the digital cathedral collapsed, I felt tendrils of consciousness reaching for me, trying to pull me deeper into the system. "You can't escape," Dr. Mnemonic said, his form now barely visible. "You're part of this now, part of me." He was right, partially. My 6 months of working at the theater had created connections between my mind and the network. I could feel those connections now, like hooks in my consciousness, trying to drag me down into the digital depths. But I had something Dr. Mnemonic didn't understand. I had a choice. "I acknowledge my own passage," I said. The hooks snapped, the connections severed, and I found myself standing in the ruins of Theater 13. The screens were gone, the digital cathedral dissolved. Marcus's body was gone too, finally free from its endless loop. I was alone in an empty room, but for the first time in months, I felt truly free. The Recall Theater closed permanently the following week. The official story was a gas leak that had made the building unsafe for occupancy, but I knew the truth. The network was dead, its central consciousness scattered beyond repair. Mnemonic Industries filed for bankruptcy within days. Their research facilities were seized by the government, their employees scattered to other companies. The memory viewing technology was classified and locked away, deemed too dangerous for civilian use. I never saw Vera again, but sometimes I catch glimpses of her in old photographs, standing in the background of other people's wedding pictures, smiling peacefully. She found her way back to Harold, I think. Back to the memories that truly belonged to her. As for me, I found a new job at a regular movie theater, the kind that shows films with actors and special effects and stories that never really happened. It's quieter work, less complicated. But sometimes, late at night when I'm closing up, I think about all the people who walked through those emergency exits, all the trapped memories that found their way home. And I remember that sometimes the most important rule is knowing when to break all the others. The human mind wasn't meant to be imprisoned, digital or otherwise. Our memories, our experiences, our pain and joy and love, they're not meant to be harvested or stored or preserved forever. They're meant to be lived, and then, when the time comes, they're meant to be let go. That's what makes us human. Not the perfection of our recall, but the imperfection of our remembering. And the courage to acknowledge when it's time to walk through the exit door, even when we can't see what's waiting on the other side.